As we said in our last lesson, Saul and David were the first two kings over Israel during the period when the entire kingdom was united. David managed to maintain that unity throughout his lifetime. Upon his death, David's son, Solomon, would then replace him as monarch, the third and last king of the United Kingdom. The life of Solomon is recorded for us in the books of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. Before David's death, he put down an attempt on the part of his fourth son, Adonijah, to take over the throne. David did so by making it known publicly that Solomon was to be his successor. Being a young man and lacking his father's military prowess and leadership experience, Solomon seems to have felt overwhelmed with his responsibilities. He prayed a prayer to the Lord. "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people?" The Lord, touched by Solomon's request, not for wealth and power, but only for wisdom, gave him what he asked for, and also for what he had not. And God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you in all your days." Solomon came to the throne as Israel reaped the benefits of David's military success. He amassed a fortune that far surpassed that of any of the kings. And Solomon, still in his youth, gave Israel a great treasure of religious and cultural significance that would last nearly 400 years. David wished to build a temple to the Lord, but was denied the privilege because of his history of warfare and the amount of blood that he had shed. Even though it was God himself who directed David and gave him the victories, it seems that God did not want his name to be associated with bloodshed or victory over his enemies, but with peace. And so, Solomon built the temple upholding David's legacy, and he brought all of the wealth and splendor of this kingdom to bear on this project. Read 1 Kings 5 through 7 to get a mental image of the grandeur of this gold-laden shrine. And God did pour into Solomon all that he had promised. Solomon sat on an ivory throne in a gilded palace. Sages and rulers came from afar to sit at the feet of Solomon and hear the wisdom with which he spoke. He collected proverbs from the wisest people abroad. He studied nature and animals. In fact, he had his own collection of exotic animals. He was a connoisseur of fine food and drink, and he appreciated good music. And it was all done as only a wealthy king could do it. Solomon also enjoyed the peace that had been won by his father's military success. He had many military alliances with many countries, and this would be his undoing. As a sign of peace with other nations, he took wives from them, daughters of kings and magistrates, 700 of them, and 300 concubines. He built palaces for the women and shrines to their gods, and even offered sacrifices to those gods in order to appease his wives. True to his character, God was displeased with the idolatry that Solomon allowed to enter the nation. God told Solomon that the kingdom would not be stripped from him during his lifetime, but that after his death, the kingdom would be divided. God said, "Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to you and your son for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen." Included in Solomon's legacy are several writings that are included in the canon of the Old Testament. Solomon is credited with the writing of the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. The book of Proverbs is largely a collection of pithy sayings that direct the reader toward moral wisdom and good living. The book of Ecclesiastes is a great experiment carried out by the wealthiest and wisest of men who brought all his wealth and power to bear on his pursuit for fulfillment in life. This story is the story of every young person in search of fulfillment and ultimately finding it in a recognition of God and his influence in our lives. Finally, the book of Song of Solomon provides a beautiful love drama between a shepherd king and his rural bride-to-be. The story, again, could be that of any young couple in love, imagined as either a simple or a stately affair. The story is about the beauty of young love, the intensity of its desires and imaginations, its fulfillment in marriage, and the elevation of the status of the two lovers as they grow together. In preserving the lineage of David, Solomon's son, Rehoboam, would continue to reign over Jerusalem and the surrounding tribal territories. This territory would come to be known only as Judah, the largest of the southern tribes and the tribal home of its capital, Jerusalem. The northern half of the nation, thereafter called Israel, would fall into the hands of an idolatrous king named Jeroboam. The idolatry of Jeroboam would re-echo throughout its history. The northern capital would become the city of Samaria in the tribe of Ephraim. God chose to preserve and chronicle the lives and times of both the Davidic dynasty in Judah, which, as prophesied, was never broken, and also the several sequential dynasties of Israel. So now we have left the period of the United Kingdom and, with the death of Solomon, entered upon the period of the divided kingdom. Like every other history in the Bible, the history of Solomon is a story of successes and failures, a thoroughly human story. Solomon has everything privilege can buy, but all his privilege cannot buy him immunity from fallibility and failure because of his own appetites. The only way we can see Solomon's failure is not when held to the standard of our own lives or to those of other human leaders, but only when they're held to the light of a perfect and holy God. That's what the Bible does. It shows us ourselves. Like a mirror, it reveals the character traits that make up our strengths and weaknesses. This gives us the desire to do better, but more importantly, it shows us that God is gracious at times when we fail. Moral failure is certainly not without consequences, but God continues faithful in his promises through those failures. Thanks for joining us again today. Next time, the kingdoms of Judah and Israel.